Ladies and gentlemen, presenting the Professor Greg Dooley and the pundit Steve Clark. Men, take the mic.
It's the Professor and the Pundit with Greg Dooley and Steve Clark, and we're proudly presented by Nick Hopwood, who's a certified financial planner, founder, and president of Peak Wealth Management. Retire with peak confidence. Visit Nick's website at peakwm.com. Today on the program, Michigan hangs 50 on Northwestern on Senior Day, but the buzz wasn't for our seniors. It was for a particular senior in high school, Bryce Underwood. But first, Greg, let's talk about the game. A complete beatdown of the Cats, Michigan's best game of the season.
Balanced, rush for 200 yards, just around 200 yards passing, punted just once. It was the beatdown, the smash that everyone was looking for, Steve. And along with the young man we're going to talk about here in a little bit, it left everyone feeling hope. Hope for the future, hope even for Columbus, Steve. Are we putting it together? Did we fix our offensive woes? And yes, we're talking about the Northwestern Wildcats, but it was impressive and it was fun. And it made for a fun day when everyone was kind of looking this one of the schedule and going, this is going to be lame. It actually turned out to be quite an exciting day.
Michigan's offense absolutely exploding in this one, and the defense was as advertised, and they did it without Will Johnson again, surrendering just 6 points, surrendering just 127 yards while giving out 6 sacks, 2 by Josiah Stewart.
Yeah, and on the other side of the ball, we saw a 2-minute offense effectively. This team, yes, Steve, and it resulted in a TD at the end of the first half, which was impressive. Warren, outside of the pretty bad interception he threw, solid. 26 for 35. He found 11 different receivers, including a couple of seniors there, Steve, who wanted to get the ball to. It was just a great outcome for the offense. And again, the defense is the real deal. We'll talk about Ohio State in a little bit. Now we got to see it on the other side of the ball. It was great. I feel like the game, Steve, it might have been over at halftime, but probably it was when Mullings pounded in that third rushing TD to go up 24-6. They weren't going to put 25 points on us in that game.
No, Northwestern has had like 4 games now where they haven't had an offensive touchdown. They were actually Michigan light in terms of the offense, and the Wolverines had never scored more than 30 points all season.
Yeah.
They hang up a 50. Also the first time all season that Michigan scored touchdowns on 3 consecutive drives. The last time that they did it on 2 consecutive drives, you had to go all the way to the first half of the Arkansas State game. So this is why I say this was absolutely their best game of the season, and it couldn't have come at a better time a week before Ohio State.
Yeah, I remember I was talking to Al Borges, contributed to the show 24/7 Sports with Sam Webb early in the season, and he said something about if we do this, this, and this, we can score 30 points a game. And I looked at him, I go, we score 30 points a game, we're going to the playoff. Like that, and I think that would have been true this year. We saw the offense explode, and yeah, this defense isn't giving up many points, and especially not to Northwestern. So,
well, the youth is getting better. Will Johnson not being there has given, guys like Amir Hall and Zeke Berry and Jair Hill all of this playing experience, and you're seeing in the second half of the season where they have gotten better. And now you're seeing kind of a different team over the last few weeks. Just before the Northwestern game, Ohio State was listed as a 22.5-point favorite. After the way things look for Michigan in this one, maybe it looks like they can compete a little bit better than 3 touchdowns.
Yeah, and so bigger picture, of course, this means Michigan will go to a bowl game. They'll get the additional practices up to the bowl game. Depends on what that game is and where it is, but that'll be really important.
That's 15 practices, Greg.
Minimum. It's everyone throws that number out. You get to practice 20 hours a week up until your bowl game, so that could be 15. It could be more.
But
yeah,
it's a whole heck of a lot of time
to
be able to get these inexperienced guys some more playing time, and you're seeing more and more freshmen contributing to the game like they did on Saturday.
Yeah, no, it's really important. If you don't make a bowl game, you can still work out, you can watch film, you can do those kind of things, but you can't practice. And it does make the Ohio State game more interesting, Steve. I want to hear your previews. By the way, of bowl games, we've heard some rumors of Music City, and I don't know if that's just wishful thinking from people from Nashville, but I've heard about that. There's the Pinstripe Bowl in New York City, which would be nice for me. Maybe I'll fly out there. Obviously not going to be quite the scene or the ride that we had last year, where we were simply licking our chops, of course, after the Ohio State game and the Big Ten championship, just waiting for our destination, which we knew, which was the Rose Bowl, which was amazing.
Florida Bowls that seemed like worst-case scenarios are not even in the questions right now. There's just too many teams that actually have 6 or 7 win seasons who have a fan base that is starved to go out for somewhere nice. And compared to Michigan, we're a little bit spoiled. But Rutgers is bowl eligible. Illinois is bowl eligible. Michigan State has a chance to be bowl eligible.
Inevitably, though, we're going to jump over somebody again and really piss them off because someone's going to want Michigan.
Yeah, there's plenty of teams. USC probably hasn't gone out to the state of Florida in quite some time either. So all these things are there, but it is just important for the future of Michigan football to be able to have those extra practices in preparation for that. Speaking of the future of Michigan football, though, this is where everybody has been excited about since Thursday night.
We're talking about Bryce Underwood. We don't need to tell you, the number 1 QB and number 1 overall recruit. People are saying, is this the biggest recruit Michigan's ever had? Very possibly. We've had some big ones. We've had 5 stars. This is Chris Webber-like, if you think about that. Magic Johnson, if you go back in the day at Michigan State.
He's the number 1 of number ones, apparently.
Yes. Now, look, they didn't have recruiting rankings, but trust me, the people were recruiting in the 30s. And when Tom Harmon came out of Gary, Indiana, he was the best high school athlete in multiple sports. Everybody wanted him. He was a freak. And so
I'm sure Bronco Nagurski ranks very high in the Minnesota rankings if they ever had it back then.
Yeah, he sure was. He was a huge man. And we don't talk a lot about recruiting for a lot of reasons. We're not about stars and rankings and all that. But the fact is, this is a big deal. And having taught the NIL class, I obviously know a lot of people in the orbit here or directly involved here with what's going on. So, all right. So here's a little inside pool. Since the cat's out of the bag now. All right. So you have this woman, Jolynn, who is presented as Larry Ellison's partner, wife, whatever, in the announcement. And who's Larry Ellison? Of course, this is the eccentric founder of Oracle. In that James Bond-like rich guys who do interesting things like Elon Musk. Net worth, I always question these things, but it's clearly in excess of $200 billion, right? This guy has FU money like nobody. He can do whatever he wants, right? He's above the law, as Big Earn said in Kingpin. So here's what happens. So she is, I'm not sure that they're married, and people have said it's his wife, okay? She is a Michigan grad. She contacted a Michigan collective around the Rose Bowl time and ultimately ended up connecting with Hail Impact, which is our charitable collective, okay, that's run by Michael Leach is one of the principals there, Matt Leach's brother, Ricky Leach's son, Chin Wirapuli, who you may know about, was one of the guys who created it and set it up. She connected with those guys and made a large donation, about $1 million to them, okay? They said, listen, you need to talk to Champion Circle. They're running this other collective. They're doing a lot of good things. And she ended up making another donation to Champion Circle, okay? This is serious inside pool, Steve. Then Larry Ellison and Jolynn came back together and made an additional donation weeks, months later, but in between now and the Rose Bowl, sometime in between then.
So you know who's having a huge problem other than LSU about this Bryce Underwood thing?
Other than LSU?
Yeah, other than LSU.
Well, some of the recruiting services got pants during this. Is that what you're talking about?
No.
Okay.
University of Illinois. They're very upset.
Why?
Most of their tweets are basically saying WTF. Why? Because Larry Ellison is a graduate of Illinois.
I didn't know.
And everybody knows this in Champaign.
That's funny.
That one of their biggest graduates is Larry Ellison, and he's giving his money to Michigan? Like, who needs it? Has Illinois ever received a gift of that amount that could change their program?
Oh, my God.
They're so livid right now at the entire process.
Because I'm a nerd, I happen to know that Illinois has very rich computer science program in history, and I wonder if he's a product of that. That computer science program there. That is funny, Steve. I love it. Michigan gets over on Illinois again. I love it.
Bo is smiling.
Okay. Then the relationship was firmly in place. This is a large donor who wants to support. We have other large donors who want to get into it. And surprisingly, through, maybe not, we can talk about that, but through all the struggles Michigan's had this year, it truly did rally the money cannon, if you will, the Michigan money cannon. And people really got, like, we have to use this as an opportunity to really flex here. And the Ellisons were big time in these conversations.
Is this any different than the loan cannon?
Lone Cannon!
Loan cannon. Not much. It's,
Okay.
It's about the same. It's like, we need some money. Loan cannon. Okay. All right. So a couple things happened with Bryce that Sam Webb revealed. That Bryce actually did meet with the coaches to talk about. This is after his commitment to LSU. This was a quiet, private meeting that one of the coaches at Belleville told Alan True at 24/7 Sports, and Alan True reported it. When other people went to go verify that this meeting with Michigan coaches happened, the coaches all denied it because Bryce didn't want it out, and no one wanted this out. So what happened was the other recruiting agencies said this was a lie. No, this actually happened. And Sam revealed all of this on WTKA. Okay. So this meeting happened. So obviously there's a conversation. So what they did was they brought the band back together. This is Nate Forbes. This is the Ellisons. This is the big donors.
Now, who is Nate Forbes?
Nate Forbes is a real estate investor. He was a former part owner of the Cleveland Cavaliers when LeBron James won the championship there. He owns Somerset Mall, right, where they did the signing event and they did the toy drive and all that. He owns premium shopping experiences, that they call it, but we're talking about high-end malls in high-end locations. If you're not from Michigan, Somerset Mall is where all the fancy stores where you can buy like Louis Vuitton type stuff, right? For very, very high wealth individuals. He's been almost like the spokesperson, if you will, for Champion Circle, because I think he spoke with his dollars. He wrote big checks to get Champion Circle moving. And we moved slow. We did. We moved slow. Suddenly now, with other donors, with the Ellisons now publicly, that was released in Champion Circle, we now have a very, very large focus of funding. Okay, so here's what I heard happen with Bryce. There was the interest after his commitment to LSU. There was interest earlier this year. He went back to Michigan and said, I am going to hold my commitment to LSU. I'm not coming. And Michigan said, through spokespeople, okay, if you change your mind, let us know. Something happened he slept on it, and he came back. And my understanding is he spent some more time with the coaches quietly, right? Or talked to them or had conversations, and they came out with another package for Bryce. And my understanding is it's more front-loaded, where he's going to benefit more of this up front. Details I do not have, but that was my understanding. And this was an offer that LSU, I don't know if he shopped it back to LSU, but it was an offer that LSU couldn't really match.
Can we clear up a little bit about the timeline?
Sure.
This part where you say Bryce reaffirmed his commitment to LSU. Was that a week ago? Was that a few months ago? Do you know?
I think it's closer to a week ago. Weeks or in the days leading up to the decision where he flipped. I believe there was this isn't going to work. I'm going to stick with LSU. And then there was a call back. The exact precise date. This is recently, though, Steve, is my understanding.
Your understanding was
Yes.
recent. Okay.
Yes.
I'm here to tell you I don't know. So I'm just going for there.
This is so let's be clear. I know a lot of people. I talk to a lot of people.
Yeah.
Okay. A lot of people that are in the news. I am not in touch with anybody at Belleville, in the family at Belleville, but I know a lot of the other players involved with the collectives and a lot of the donors and things like that. So this is not a two-source story, or anything like that.
This is a second degree of telephone tag or separation.
This is me piecing firsthand conversations with people who were involved, but different people involved at different times, okay? Plus the information we have that's public from Sam Webb. So we've also heard that he's more comfortable with Sharon versus Jim Harbaugh. I can't verify any of that, but who wouldn't be? Okay, if you're a young person, who are you going to identify more with? You're probably going to identify more with Sharon Moore, who likes, we know he likes his Jordans, he likes music, he likes things that are more appeal to the younger audience.
And you don't have to sing a jolly good fellow.
You don't have
in the locker room.
Jim likes to sing he's a jolly good fellow, which is, I believe, aging my parents, okay, who are in their 80s. Okay, that is okay. Also, I do hear it's his intent to enroll early, but I don't know. You have to graduate, of course, enroll early, and you have to have the credits to actually get out of Belleville. I don't know if any of that's happened, but what a spring game it'll be, Steve, if we are able to see either Bryce out there or at least even going through drills with the spring team. So we'll see.
National TV. Be national TV on Fox like last year.
Will there be coaching changes? I think inevitably there will be coaching changes. Is this going to be like a Perry Watson, who was, I believe, the Detroit Southwestern head coach, who ended up being on Michigan's bench around the time the Fab Five were there, right? Is there going to be someone in Bryce Underwood's orbit who's going to be now part of the staff, or a certain style of coach that fits his style being involved on the offense or the quarterbacks? Who knows? I will say this. Lloyd Carr had a saying, don't say something about a coach or a player that you wouldn't say to their face, or anybody, right? That was one of his things. And I do hear a lot of people talking about, like, our offensive coordinator, Kirk Campbell, things like, don't buy a house, or don't stick around, like, kind of flip it. And I asked those people, would you say that if that man was your neighbor or was in front of you? Because these people do have families, and you're like, oh, Dooley, it's a coach. Yeah, but I don't think people would say these things in front of people if they knew them, if they knew they actually lived. Because frankly, Steve, we live in the orbit of the athletic campus, and in our neighborhood, we have a lot of coaches. These are real people. It's okay to say, yeah, Michigan's probably going to have a new coordinator or quarterbacks coach or this or that. But there are things you can say that don't have to be directly personal that affect somebody, because people hear it. I guess I'm on my soapbox, Steve, but I wonder if these people who make these flippant remarks would say that in front of the person it affects.
These are things that not only you care about.
Okay.
We'll put it that way. We'll save that for a different topic at the end.
I do think there's a respectful way to handle some of these things. And Michigan is going to have changes. They probably should. Some things didn't work this year. We know that. We could say, looking back, it's probably going to be a tough one in Columbus, Steve. Do we have a shot, though, against these guys? Is there an opportunity for Michigan to make hay in Columbus? Because Indiana, for a bit there, was in this game. They made some huge mistakes, but they were hanging for a bit. Can Michigan do anything with these guys?
Well, Indiana scored first, and then they made some special teams gaffes. They couldn't handle a routine snap that was lost deep in their own territory. Rourke threw an interception in his own territory. That set up Ohio State for some scores. Then they allowed a punt return for Caleb Downs to be returned for a touchdown, and that just basically let the air out of the balloon. And Indiana really, really struggled on offense other than the opening possession. For Michigan, the biggest thing that they could probably try to take advantage of is the question marks Ohio State has at the offensive line. They lost their starting and backup left tackle earlier in the season, and last week their starting center tore his Achilles, and he is out for the rest of the year. Those two starters are the best on Ohio State's offensive line. The good news for Ohio State is last year's center, who started all 13 games, was not playing at all, was then playing at left guard, and then now moved over to center. So he's back in his normal position. The weakness is at the left guard spot, where the left guard is kind of green.
Okay.
They moved their original starting left guard over to left tackle. So the tackle position is solid, but the left guard position is really weak. And they're just not as strong as they were at the beginning of the year. You go up against Michigan's defensive line and Josiah Stewart, who's having one heck of a second half of a season, if not an overall season, along with our stalwarts and Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant and Derek Moore. There is a chance for Michigan to win the line of scrimmage when Ohio State has the ball. And our linebackers are bruising, not as fast, but they're bruising. Could be a difference in the running game in which Ohio State has the ball. Offensively, it's going to be a little bit more difficult for Michigan all the way around because their defense is very good, and they're led by Caleb Downs, the safety transfer from Alabama. He's been great all year. Not every Ohio State returning player on defense is having as good as 2024 as they did in 2023. Cornerback Denzel Burke is one of those guys. But does Michigan have the talent and explosiveness to exploit that? Overall, I don't think so. I do like the fact that Tyler Morris in the last couple of games, he made an NFL type of catch against Indiana, led the team in receiving yards this week against Northwestern.
A guy who shined in the Rose Bowl with that great touchdown catch, if I recall correctly, and we were kind of hoping to see more of him. Obviously, Steve, not much, interestingly enough, not a lot of pressure on Michigan in this one. No one's really expecting him to win. Doesn't mean that much other than the fact that it's Ohio. A great ton of pressure, an immense ton of pressure. Ohio State has to win this game. Ryan Day has to win this game. And gosh, if there's a punch that they take early, if they get gobbled up early by their defense, no pun intended with Thanksgiving coming up, if we get a touchdown early and break through, boy, you wonder how they handle the pressure because they're going to be feeling it, man.
Well, it reminds me of the 96 game where Ohio State was basically undefeated and they were going, for the national championship, but they needed to beat Michigan. Michigan, by the way, was 7-4 that year, their second consecutive season of 7-4, and they thought they had learned their lesson from losing at Michigan in 1995. Not that any of these players are going to remember what happened in 1996 and take it as a cautionary tale. It's just that's just for us, for fans, that a repeated scenario could be there. What's the difference between 7-4 and 6-5? One game. So what happened in that game? That was a low-scoring game. Cornerback, I think it was Sean Springs for Ohio State, slipped, and Ty Streets just took a simple slant and took it to the house. And it was a low-scoring game, and Michigan played well enough on defense to be able to get the win. Will that type of formula work out?
If we pull this off, we're going to have to march, Steve, down to Oscars and have an epic regular season triumphant celebration.
I'll make time on my schedule for it. How about you?
Perfect. Yes, I will.
In previous weeks, we have talked about fixed rate incomes and CDs, and we've talked about the money market rates. And something that has always kind of attracted me a bit, especially when people are fearing some sort of recession of some sort, is to look for good stocks that pay out good dividends.
Well, everyone's in search for income, especially if you're, like Duels over here, semi-retired, right? So, you're looking for that cash flow, that income without having to sell anything. Right? Because when you're selling things, you're creating taxes, you're perhaps depleting the principal of the portfolio. We all love the idea of skimming the interest off the top.
I think it's something called an aristocrat fund. These are funds that pay high dividends, and the dividends don't ever decrease. They always seem to increase or at least stay the same.
Yeah, I love this concept, actually. And you're right, there's an ETF. It's called the Aristocrat Fund. But to be a dividend aristocrat, do you know that you have to raise your dividend for 25 years straight? So it's kind of like an elite club.
How many stocks are like that?
It's fewer and fewer. So if there's dividend trouble in the future, they'll have to rewrite the rules. But it's a diversified fund with different industries, which is important because certain industries do pay more dividends, like let's just say utilities versus tech, right? Tech is usually anchored at 0 on those dividends. And by the way, when I was in Econ 102, okay, this is in, I think, 99. What's going on in 99? Tech bubble, and there's revaluation of everything, the new economy. What happened next?
The bubble. It burst.
Right. Yes, exactly right.
So, Nick, how do people who want to get in touch with you, want to learn more, maybe they heard something on our podcast and they want to connect with you, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Best way would be visiting peakwm, as in wealthmanagement.com. You can set up an appointment online and learn a lot about what we've got going on with our podcast and other programs easily through the website.
And what's the website again?
peakwm.com.
So speaking of Nick, we saw Nick, he hit Joe's Garage, Steve, as your guest. Got to hang out for him a little bit. I hung up upstairs in the rarefied air of Joe's offices where you can go and warm up. So got to hang out with Nick for a little bit. That was cool. Who else did you see at the pregame show?
Listener Gary. who is a certified meteorologist, wrote some handwritten notes for me, and it's going to be weather related. He wasn't going to send me notes about, defensive efficiencies versus offensive inefficiencies, but we're looking at some of the coldest and warmest events that have happened in the Michigan-Ohio State series. So I want to look at one that maybe what Gary says is the warmest ever since 1950. It was in 1974. It was 64 degrees in Columbus, Ohio that day. Ohio State did win that game. Michigan was so close of getting a couple of field goals from going in that would have won it for them. And that's when Ohio State was having a bit of a streak over both Schembechler and the Michigan Wolverines.
That was smack dab in the middle of the 10-year war. Yep.
And then, of course, when you think about all-time weather games in Columbus, Ohio versus Michigan, you have to go with the November 25th Snow Bowl.
1950.
Where it was a high of 20 degrees and over 7.5 inches of snow. It seemed like it was more snow than that.
Yeah, I thought it was closer to 2 feet. Now, I don't know if he's talking about the day of the game or the night or day before the game when that storm hit, because it basically shut down the entire Midwest.
Yeah, there was so many punts in that game. There was punting on third down. There was punting on first down.
I think 46 punts, Steve, if I recall correctly. Michigan won the game 9-3, did not have a first down in the game.
Amazing.
And you're like, well, they scored a touchdown. That's a first down. If you use statistic nerds, no, they blocked a punt and scored.
And
Zero first downs.
And if I remember my history right, Greg, Ohio State's so disgusted with that stat and that performance, they fired their head coach and hired a guy named Woodrow Hayes.
Yes, they fired Wes Fessler after the game and hired Wayne Woodrow Hayes and changed the course of college football and really Michigan football, if you think about it. Am I right?
Absolutely true.
Forever. So that was epic. And by the way, I believe it was Illinois Northwestern played on the same day. And the way that game turned out, it ended up getting Michigan an unlikely trip to the Rose Bowl because they won that game in Ohio. So it was crazy. What else? Speaking of smiling, lots of smiles at Oscars, Steve. We got to give a shout out to Oscar and their new owner, James. Steve, I think we might have sold James on doing the post-game show there again in 2025. Maybe just on the strength of our bills that we were handed at the end of the night. I think it's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
And you would know because you picked up the one at our table.
I swept our table. It's fine. Shout out to listener Jamie for picking up the shots that we the victory shots.
And he's done that more than once.
Yes, we saw our friends the Bankowskis there. And by the way, the rest of the restaurant was packed. And jokes aside, James, you're killing it. We miss Oscar, but you're bringing Oscars into just like Bryce Underwood. He's James is the Bryce Underwood of restaurant runners. He's bringing Oscars into 2025 and beyond, and going to be a title-winning restaurant, I'm sure.
And there's an Oscars lager out now.
Oh, it was pretty good. Is it their brand? I had a sip of it. It kind of tasted a little like the M43-ish. It had a little bit of that fruity tinge to it. It was good. So come check it out. Steve, I got to give a shout out to a couple programs. First, the ladies hoops teams, who Nick, of course, interviewed Silas Swords and Olivia Olson. They are blowing it up. They are about to be SportsCenter highlight type films. They have not lost since their first game against South Carolina. Second, Steve, Michigan hockey went to Happy Valley this weekend and scored 16 goals, Steve, in 2 games. Now, I'm not telling you how many Penn State got, but we got more. That's all we need to know. And since Brandon Dorado showed up in my class, Steve, and gave a lecture to my students, we've won 6 straight games, undefeated in the Big Ten. Hockey's on a roll. Let's go.
Well, you should have Sharon Moore back in your class, and maybe that undefeated streak will keep going as well.
I'm hoping to, and I am working on Dusty May, Steve, for next semester. By the way, my class's registration's open. It looks good. You never know, though. It's probably like a band who's going back out on tour that sold out the previous. Like, is anyone going to come again? Is the magic gone, Steve? Have I run my course at Michigan? No pun intended. So far, registration looks good. A lot of excitement around my classes. So I'm teaching all 3 again, including NIL, which is going to take on a new face. Maybe we'll have Connor Stallions make a visit, Steve. Now, is he more appropriate for the NIL class or the history of college athletics, or my leadership class, I suppose, but I'm going to disqualify that. Where I think if he were to come in, it would be the history of college athletics would be the most interesting.
Okay.
We'll see. Okay. All right, Steve, we had an interesting day. You already talked about Ohio State taking down Indiana. It's a big one. It does give Ohio State the inside track to meet Oregon in the Big Ten championship game. There's a lot of talk in the tailgate, Steve, around the meaningfulness, I guess, of these conference championship games. Are they helping? Are they hurting, given now that we have this large playoff? I wonder how it's going to look. But suddenly we have some questions in the Big Ten. Penn State barely squeaked by the Gophers. I don't know if you caught this, Steve. Won by a point. Kind of, the Gophers were trying to stop Penn State and get the ball back for one final chance. They didn't get it, but Penn State won there.
See, what James Franklin did was, though, he did a fake punt from his own 30-yard line in a 1-point game.
Wow.
So if it didn't work, Minnesota will win the game. And this is the type of move that screws James Franklin and Penn State's program in the past. He's done that way too often, done just something odd, and it doesn't work for them, and they lose. This time, it worked for them. They never gave Minnesota a chance to get the ball back. They win the game on a fake punt. In their particular scenario, when you ask about the value of conference championships and whether you play them, and it depends on the team, and where you are in that situation. So I think Penn State is comfortably in the 12-team college football playoff. But if you lose in the Big Ten championship game to Oregon, that's probably going to hurt you. Would it hurt Penn State enough to knock them out? Probably not, but it could deter them from getting a home field game.
Yes, yeah. So, and we're starting to see those early speculation on what that might look like. In fact, I want to say someone's bracket had Ohio State and Penn State meeting each other again in the first round, with Oregon, of course, winning the championship. But we'll see. Steve, USC and Nebraska both won, to your dismay, I'm certain, because it looks like Nebraska's longest bowl drought, if you will, it will end this year.
I'm running out of ammunition on Nebraska. Yes, yeah, the longest bowl drought in Power 4, Nebraska Cornhuskers, 2016 was the last time they made it to a bowl game. College football wasn't exactly in black and white back then, but Nebraska's dominance has certainly dissipated since the 1990s. Since then, it's just amazing the number of times that they had lost a game when they could have become bowl eligible. They had lost their last 8 games over the last 2 seasons to become bowl eligible. Started off 5-1, 4-game losing streak, but now they are finally in with a convincing win over Wisconsin. And USC finally found a way to win in the fourth quarter.
Yes. Now, did you pick USC in your bowl pick? Okay, I think that separated you from the rest of the crew there.
Well, that, and I picked Arizona State to beat BYU.
Oh, that was interesting.
So I doubled up there. I went 9-1 in my prediction.
Wow.
Prediction settings for this particular week. It's not something I normally brag about, but it was a good week.
Well, you mentioned Arizona State, who their fans rushed the field, and then the refs determined there was 1 second left. It took about 20 minutes to restart the game. BYU throws a Hail Mary, and it gets caught, but at the 2.5-yard line as time expires, of course. That was wild, but we had a bunch of teams lose, Steve. Alabama scored just 3 points. Their fans must be going nuts, and lost to Oklahoma. That's their 3rd loss, so they're in trouble.
And they've lost 2 games to really subpar teams. I mean, Vanderbilt was the worst. Oklahoma has lost a ton of conference games. They've had a brutal schedule, too. But, I mean, you can't lose to Oklahoma, even in Norman, the way that they've been playing this year, and they did, and they lost convincingly to them.
Yeah, and if the playoff committee is being honest and they're just putting away the Alabama name for a second, which is a lot easier because Nick Saban isn't their coach, they don't have the resume right now, Steve. Colorado, Coach Prime was suddenly hot. Looks like they had the inside track to do great things. They lose. Ole Miss goes down. Texas A&M goes down, but they're still going to be, I think, in the championship game. And then you mentioned BYU, which has people wondering, is there a possibility that one of the P4 teams or conferences will be left out because, again, it's the top 5 conference champions that get the automatic bid. They don't say P4 plus a group of 5. They say the top rated. And there are a few that are in the mix. Now, Army got smoked by Notre Dame, which didn't help this scenario.
No, not at all.
But there is a possibility of a Big 12 team getting left out because they're just so beaten up.
So let's lay this out.
Yeah.
For the past few weeks, Boise State is expected to win the Mountain West, and their ranking is good enough to be the 4th highest rated conference.
Which they would get a bye.
Yeah, and then the Big 12's champion would be the 5th. They're not guaranteed one of the top 4 slots, but they're guaranteed a berth as one of the 5 highest rated champions.
If they are one of the 5 highest rated champions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So now, who are we talking about? Well, we're talking about the American Athletic Conference, also known as the AAC. Tulane, coming into last weekend's games, was like ranked 20th. That's a scenario where they're only going to go up. They're only going to go up in the teens because with the losses of Colorado and some other teams, there's going to be teams that are falling back down. Tulane's going to move up. Arizona State's ranked 21st. They're going to move up. There are currently 4 teams now tied for the Big 12 lead, and it could go into like step 9 million to determine who are going to be the 2 teams that play in the championship. So the question is, will the AAC's winner rank higher than the Big 12 conference champion winner?
Yes.
And my analysis tells me that it's possible, but not probable.
Yeah. It would be quite a LOL moment for the other conference.
Brett Yormark at the Big 12 will have a conniption fit, but I don't think it's going to come down to that. So I'll tell you what. The AAC championship will feature Tulane, whose rankings will be in the teens, and Army, who after their loss to Notre Dame, and it was a big loss, may drop out of the rankings altogether. There's 4 teams tied in the Big 12, and all 4 of them will be ranked. And I believe at least one Big 12 team will be ranked ahead of Tulane on championship weekend. So consider, if the higher ranked team wins, the Big 12 team will remain higher than Tulane. And if the lower team in the Big 12 championship wins instead, I think that team will leapfrog Tulane in the rankings based on having a higher quality championship win
And
in the Big 12 as opposed to Tulane beating Army, who may not be ranked.
Yes, that all could be. And it's probably going to be. And if you believe that at least there's some consideration for where the big money is flowing, and that influences people's how they think about these things. They're going to want, like, yes, you mentioned the conniption fit if they're not in. So we'll see. But interesting stuff. The home matchups are getting everybody excited, at least for now. The potential of that in that first round, that's going to be cool. Steve, I feel like we're at the moment of things only Steve cares about, or either of us.
Nobody cares.
Everybody knows nobody cares.
No one cares.
Nobody cares! I care.
By the way, someone told me, I think it was our friend Jamie at Oscars, that his house is wired like the Residence Inn, where all the switches are outside the room that you walk into, which cracks me up. But then again, I guess he's used to it. That's where he should stay.
That's what we talked about last week.
Yeah.
During the bye week, I went to Purdue's campus and took in all the sports for the first time. So went to Mackey Arena on Friday. It was number 2 Alabama against number 13 Purdue. And the atmosphere was absolutely electric. It was sustained loudness in that place, Greg. So do I think it's louder than Chrysler Arena? I remember Chrysler Arena being loud, specifically in 1985, where Michigan took on 3 teams that were like in the top 5, went to all 3 of them. I think it was Syracuse, Indiana, Illinois. Michigan won all of them, and Chrysler was absolutely fantastic. We've been to a couple of games recently where we've sat down low with one of our podcast listeners, saw some great games with great finales. Chrysler, loud. This was sustained loudness throughout the entire game. I couldn't hear the whistles from the other side of the floor. The women were cheering as loud as the men. The corner scoreboards at Mackey were hilarious, very creative, keeps people into it. The opposite atmosphere was Ross-Ade Stadium for football. Polite applause, self-deprecating, laughing as a coping mechanism. It was just so completely different between the two. Monitors and scoreboards are kind of all playing the same thing, but the way people are reacting to it, absolutely and completely different.
Tradition matters, sustained success matters. Purdue and Indiana go back and forth for who has the most all-time wins out of Big Ten schools. It's not really close after that. All that stuff matters. And they've got a damn good they've got a great historic team. And it matters.
A couple of cool things just want to mention out because these are the only things that I care about, Greg. The seniors for the marching band in the football game. They have the world's largest drum. Texas disputes this, but they have the world's largest bass drum, right? So all the seniors were lined up like at commencement in high school, and there were about 4 mallets, and they said the name of each senior in the marching band, and they took the mallet and they just pounded once on the big bass drum.
That's cool.
And then threw the mallet to the next person in line, and it went through very, very quickly. But I thought that was a cool thing.
That's really cool.
And then the other thing is always about the next generation of fans. They play this music. You know it. It's the Lion King. It's Simba being held up as the future king of the land. At Purdue, they put little babies up in the air to be shown on the scoreboard.
That is
like the age limit has got to be like less than a year.
Dude,
if you're 2 years old, you're too old to qualify.
Yeah. But so you weren't picking up Hayden.
No, I don't think I could pick up my son.
He is a beast.
He's 6'5".
Same with my son.
But the idea of these parents, hoisting up their newborns,
that's hilarious,
to the music of the Lion King. I thought that was a cool thing.
That's cool. I saw a cool thing related to our band. They gave the marching band last year national championship rings, and they are more wearable, but they are fashioned after one of the national championship rings with the diamonds in the front that the team got, but they made them like smaller. They're sweet. I happened to see it from my former student Joey, who was at the Victor's Lounge.
Oh, very good.
Yeah, out there.
I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, it was great.
He has a very cool marching band varsity coat.
Oh, yeah.
With all the patches and all the things that go along with it. But you know what would be even cooler? If Michigan could somehow find a way and get that victory in Columbus, Ohio.
Oh, my gosh.
Would that not be something?
Just for the social media blow up that would occur afterward. Just for that, Steve, but much more.
The escorting
It'd be amazing.
The escorting of Ryan Day out of town. If there was a tarmac to be fired on, that would happen. And if they did, Greg, it would make all of us feel like Michigan football being the reigning national champions.
Go Blue.
Go Blue.